Hi, I'm Alicia Grunow, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Improvement Collective.
And my name is Sandra Park, and I am a co-founder of the Improvement Collective as well. The Improvement Collective is a small but mighty organization. We spend a lot of our time, I would say, doing three lines of work. One is trying to build the capacity of the field in improvement science. So we spend some of our time running trainings for people that are interested in building their improvement skills and applying them to the work in their organizations. We do a lot of advising and consulting, so supporting organizations that are engaging in improvement to help them organize their projects or their networks to get to the outcomes that they seek to achieve. And then the third would be writing. And so one of our beliefs is that we take opportunities to reflect on the work that we're doing and to be able to consolidate some of our own learning and to then be able to share that with the broader field.
Improvement science is one of a variety of approaches that falls under a larger umbrella. Some people call that larger umbrella continuous improvement or quality improvement, but it's one of those branches that fits in a larger set of approaches around improvement and that has been applied in education. We define improvement science as an evolving field of study that has all theories, methods, and practices that are all about how organizations, communities, and teams go about improving outcomes for those that they serve. As a field, improvement science it's an applied science, which is important, and it takes as its central premise that its job is to try to figure out how to improve systems. And in order to do that, it pulls on a lot of different disciplines that include the psychology of change, how we understand variation, the philosophy of learning, and systems thinking. And so the big idea behind improvement science is that the way that we're going to get to better outcomes for those that we serve is by applying a combination of subject matter or content expertise and improvement expertise as a way to accelerate learning going forward. When we introduce improvement science to people that are new to improvement science, we often begin with talking about the improvement part of improvement science. And improvement fundamentally is about recognizing and feeling a dissatisfaction with the status quo, with recognizing that we could achieve better outcomes than we're currently able to do. And that improvement ethic gives the sort of fuel and the motivation around an improvement science approach. And then the question is, well, how do you go from where we're at to where we want to go? And there's some things that are different about how an improvement science approach would approach that than other kinds of approaches that happen after we call out gaps. So first and foremost, we treat problems as systems problems. And our job is to re-engineer the system to produce better outcomes. The improvement science involves those that are closest to the problem in solving the problem, as opposed to just receivers of reforms. They're actively involved in the problem solving. And then finally, we assume that we can't get to where we're trying to go right now because we don't know how to get there. And so we organize improvement science as a learning journey moving forward.
Improvement science work happens, I pretty much would say everywhere. It's designed to be a flexible methodology that can be used in a variety of different contexts. So often we'll sometimes see, I think most frequently, improvement projects that are carried out in classrooms or schools and districts, and they're really designed to address a specific problem of practice or to improve a particular work practice or process within that system. So sometimes you'll see teachers that are using improvement to improve a particular instructional practice. At the school level, you may see, we've seen schools that have been trying to use it to improve student sense of belonging across their entire school. And then we've seen districts use it for both instructional means, but also operational improvement opportunities. So trying to improve, for example, like their recruitment and hiring process to make it more efficient and to be able to get better candidates into their teaching pool. I would say, though, that there are some schools and districts that also use improvement principles as a way to actually manage their whole organization. I think one of the things that often gets forgotten when we talk about kind of the history of improvement science is that Deming really thought about improvement as a management philosophy. And so it's trying to think about how do you use some of the improvement methods and ideas to actually manage an organization in order for that organization to get to a different level or a better level of system performance, and to market improvement in particular outcomes that they want to address. And then here you can kind of imagine that there are actually multiple improvement projects that are happening that are all aligned to the organization's strategic goals, with the ultimate goal of better serving and meeting the needs of the people that they are designed to serve and the people in their community. I think a lot of people probably in education have seen the use of improvement science in networks. And so improvement science becomes the shared methodology that a host of organizations use in order to solve or work on a common problem or practice using a common set of measures along with this common methodology, with the belief that if you have kind of a common set of things that you're working towards, it accelerates the learning that can happen across different organizations that are working collectively in a network situation. And I would say that it would also apply to a community strategy. So we've seen a lot of collective impact networks. I think Strive is one of them. All Cincinnati Thrive is a network that a lot of folks talk about, where they are using improvement science as a shared methodology for all of the work that they're doing, so that people are kind of working under the same type of learning system in order to learn together, in order to get to a common goal or shared outcome. I think one of the things that's really interesting, Alicia alluded a little bit to this, is that given that improvement, I think, is grounded in this idea of systems thinking, and that's a really fundamental principle, is that improvement science really believes in the importance of bringing a host of different people to contribute to the work, right? And so in that sense, you're trying to think about bringing different types of knowledge that are needed in order to address some of these problems. And so you can imagine that you have some folks, researchers that are coming with a research base that could be incredibly valuable as a source of ideas in order to accelerate improvements. You have people that are bringing what we call professional knowledge. And so these are people that live in organizations day in and day out and know how those organizations are run and organized, and so have that particular knowledge set that's important, since we're going to be trying to change those systems that they're working in. And then I think we also think about, which is, to be perfectly frank, sometimes I think underthought, is the idea of like experiential knowledge. So really trying to put families, students at the center of their work. They have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge about what works and what doesn't work, in terms of getting to better outcomes. And so being able to capitalize on that, and then connecting that and tying in improvement knowledge as a way to try to figure out how can we all learn together, what can we draw on in terms of other methodologies and sciences, in order to be able to harness all of this other type of expertise and to make sure that it's all moving kind of in the same direction, and that we're all learning collectively together, in order to get to some of the outcomes that we see. Alicia and I we're currently working on trying to launch a new improvement network, a statewide improvement network around chronic absenteeism. And so we are in the design phase. And so we have researchers at the table. So we have somebody from UC Davis, as well as some other policy folks in the field that are contributing to the design of this network. We have superintendents and principals and other folks who work in schools. We have county office representation. And then we are trying to figure out deliberate ways to engage students and families in the work. And our belief is that if all of us can come together, lend our expertise, lend our view of the system, and then figure out how to collaboratively create a network to address chronic absenteeism, that's actually going to accelerate our results and hopefully enable us to get to scale much more quickly than maybe other types of initiatives that have a different way of thinking about how to tackle the problem.
So improvement science is for really any team or org or group or organization or network that has an outcome that really matters to them, that they're willing to go on a learning journey for. So the really cool thing about improvement science, where it gets its power, is it provides a way to unite the efforts of the researchers, of those with practical expertise, of those with lived experience in a common learning journey. So all of their expertise can add up to actual outcomes and change. And so one of the big ideas in improvement science is that we're able to democratize the problem solving. So we supercharge the problem solving across an effort, and then we democratize access to problem solving, which then allows us to have so many more people learning their way into outcomes, and that should accelerate our ability to make meaningful change. The improvement science is really good for re-engineering systems, for organizing a learning journey to go from the system that produces the current outcomes to figuring out how to re-engineer that system to create drastically different outcomes. What's important, I think, about improvement science and what makes it a little bit different than some other improvement approaches is that the center of gravity where it starts is really in the outcomes as they exist in the organizations in which they exist and how those outcomes that really matter for the organizations and the communities. One thing that's really important about an improvement science approach is that the center of gravity is really on the outcomes that are currently existing, and we organize around moving those outcomes. And those need to be outcomes that are important for organizations and, more importantly, for the communities and the people that those organizations serve. And so the expertise that is brought to bear, the methodology that is brought to bear, is centered on those outcomes as they exist. And so it's that we integrate researchers, we integrate practitioners in order to try to move those outcomes in real organizations, in the real world. And so what the sort of premier form of knowledge that we should have at the end of any kind of improvement science approach, whether it's in a network or in a team, is really learning generating that how-to knowledge of making real change in the world.
Think improvement science works best when, one, you have a kind of a clear outcome that you want to achieve. And I think that that builds on what Alicia just said. So we have a clear sense of what it is that we're trying to focus on or to target. And then, I think we often use the framework from the Institute from Healthcare Improvement of this idea of wills, ideas, and execution. And so I think you need people that have the motivation and the desire to change, that are willing to overcome obstacles, recognizing that obstacles exist, but that's not going to be something that's going to stop them, and that are really willing to actively engage in the work, right? It's hard work to try to make that change. So having that will and being able to kind of persist in the face of challenges, I think is critically important. I think we also need to have ideas. And so I think the way in which we probably think about it are these are solutions that we think are going to address the problem or the issue, and that probably are kind of outside of the status quo, right? If we knew how to solve the problem, we have already done it. So we're looking for ideas that we think are potentially novel, that we can try, that we have maybe some basis of evidence around, would be the ideal scenario. And then I think it's also execution is important, so we have to have the ability to actually be able to do the ideas, try the ideas, and then also to, I think, have the ability to learn from what happens when we try it out or test it out in practice. And so do we have that mechanism to also be able to figure out what works and what doesn't and why? I think is also kind of part of that execution bucket. And then I would say, like, the last thing that I would think about, and Alicia and I have experienced this a fair amount, is, a lot of this work, just the way our systems are set up, leaders are the ones that often are driving a lot of work in a lot of the systems that we work in. And so they really need to come with a learning mindset, that they don't necessarily have all the answers, that they come to the problem with a sense of curiosity, and that they also, encourage failure in many ways because they see it as a really important opportunity to learn. And so sometimes when you have an organization that has what we would call like a lead learner that is able to exemplify that mindset, I think that empowers and allows other people into the system to be able to say, well, I have something that I can contribute, and I want to also be, a learner in the system, and I'm being encouraged to try things and fail, but to learn from them. So I think it's really, really critically important if you've got somebody in that position who is modeling, I think, some of the mindsets and the norms and the ways of working that we want everybody to engage and embrace. I think one of the key challenges to improve in science, and I think that this is true for any type of change that you're trying to introduce in the system, is that you're really going against or trying to buck very strong cultural norms of how work is done. And so I think that's something that we're constantly thinking about and constantly trying to figure out ways of how do you shift people's mindsets and approaches to engaging in some of this work, which I think is really, really important. I think there is a tremendous amount of or a lack of systems thinking, I think, in the places that we work. And so I would say you see lots of silos like within organizations, and then you see lots of silos across different types of organizations. And so we don't have lots of opportunities to really work together or to be able to say, hey, I see the system from my particular lens, but you may see the system from a different lens, just given where you're situated, and how can we be able to kind of open our eyes to being able to see a lot of different viewpoints. That's really hard. The way our organizations are structured and doesn't necessarily allow for that. So trying to figure out how to engage people in more systems thinking, I think, is a challenge. And one of the huge challenges that I think a lot of people have faced is around the measurement infrastructure. So we don't have really great, robust ways of collecting data to be used for improvement. Also, the measures that we need for improvement are different than some of maybe the traditional measures that we use in kind of a research or accountability framework. And so these are kind of measures that are more closely tied to the work that we're trying to improve and that need to be collected a lot more frequently. And so the types of measures that you collect, the data collection systems, and the ways in which the data needs to be shared back to teams so that they can make changes much more quickly. We don't have a good infrastructure to be able to do any of that. And that is a big roadblock that I think a lot of us are continually trying to figure out. How can we shift our systems to be able to use data more effectively in an improvement context? And then the last thing I think is what a lot of people will say that they face is really time and space to do the work. And I would also add to that, there's just a lot of instability in the organizations that we work in. There's a lot of turnover, and there's just a lot of changes that are happening that make it hard to kind of build the capacity and be able to stay focused on a problem practice for an extended period of time. So I think that that's another barrier that we often kind of think about, and what are the things that we can do to mitigate or offset some of that instability in order to ensure that the work continues to move forward.
One of Sandra and I's mentors, Uma Kodagal, has this phrase she always uses, and she says, get started before you're ready. So I don't think you need a whole lot to get started with improvement science. I think you need an outcome that's really meaningful, and you need a team or a community that's united around that outcome. And then per Sandra's point, you probably need a little bit of time and space eked out in order to actually learn across different stakeholders. And so those are the things you really need. It ends up being kind of a different challenge depending on where the improvement aspiration is coming from. So one of the tricks is you need an outcome and you need the team that is well poised to do problem solving around that outcome. So let's say you're going to work on improving algebra 2 or whatnot. Then you need the algebra 2 teachers. If your theory is that let's say that you're going to work on something like high school math outcomes, then you need high school math teachers on the team. Because one of the principles of improvement science is that the people that are closest to the problem, that are being asked to do the change, are actively involved in the problem solving of doing the change. So, if you're a researcher, this can be a little bit tricky if what you're wanting, your aspiration, the vision that you have, involves people that work in a different organization. So then you're in a position of having to recruit and find teams of people who are really excited about that outcome. And sometimes people start with the outcome and then they go trying to find the team or the community. And some people start with the team or the community and they try to agree on an outcome. And each one of those has its own challenges and its benefits. But that's basically, in the end of the day, what you need is you need the right people working on the right problem and willing to learn together going forward.